You know the exact agonizing feeling we're talking about, right? You make the list. You buy the perfect new notebook. You sit down with the absolute best of intentions, promising yourself, okay, this time is going to be different. I'm finally going to focus. But then, almost immediately, your brain just scatters. You find yourself staring blankly at a blinking cursor, and out of nowhere, your brain decides it desperately needs to remember the name of that one actor from that movie 10 years ago. Suddenly, one small notification turns into 5. A quick glance at your phone spirals into a massive mental detour. Even an unresolved conversation from yesterday sneaks back in, making your shoulders tense up. Before you've even really started, your attention has completely dissolved into this fog of alerts and half-finished tasks. It's literally like standing in a room with the dozen doors blown wide open all at once.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack exactly why this happens. But first, let's be totally honest for a second. When sitting down to work feels this exhausting, do you secretly blame yourself? Do you just assume, well, I guess I'm just lazy. I just don't have the discipline. We live in a world that is so quick to moralize our broken focus, telling us we just need to try harder or, wake up at 4 a.m. and grind it out. But what if that whole narrative is completely wrong? I want you to hear this quote, as the author Pete Kossabun so beautifully puts it in Quantum Flow. You are not here to conquer life. You are here to become available to it. And that right there, that is the core, deeply compassionate premise of our explainer today. We have to stop shaming the scattered self. Instead, we're going to look at the actual, literal, biological, and psychological truths hiding right beneath our fractured attention. It is time to stop treating yourself like the enemy. So let's get into Section 1, the myth of laziness, understanding the scattered self. We're going to kick things off by completely dismantling this deeply held false belief that a lack of focus is just a moral failure or some kind of character flaw. Are you really lazy? Modern hustle culture is practically screaming at us all day that success is just a matter of grinding it out. But honestly, that advice is kind of cruel when you think about it. It tells an exhausted, fragmented person to simply concentrate without ever bothering to ask why they're fragmented in the first place. You aren't failing because you don't care. The desire is absolutely there. Your intention is there. We constantly judge the symptom while totally ignoring the cause. We slop on the label of lacking willpower, but the deeper truth? You are carrying a massive psychic overload of competing signals. You're trying to create, or write, or build, while your attention is completely divided, and your nervous system is literally on guard, watching for threats or just desperately trying to remember 10 unfinished tasks. You aren't empty of desire, you're just overloaded. And to really understand this overload, we need to talk about attention residue. This is a brilliant concept from researcher Sophie Lore. See, the human brain doesn't just cleanly switch from one demand to another, like a computer changing tabs. Actually, scratch that, it's more like dragging all the heavy files from the old tab right into the new one. It drags context with it. When you switch tasks, especially if the first one wasn't resolved, a portion of your attention stays stuck behind. It's still back there worrying over a vaguely passive-aggressive Slack message or an unfinished email. This is a very real cognitive cost. It means you might be partially absent before your real work even begins. Which brings us to Section 2, the divided self, the high cost of unfinished loops. So building on that, we hit this idea of the divided self. The legendary psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called this inner disorder psychic entropy. It's what happens when your mind literally loses usable energy because everything inside is conflicting. You sit down to work, but your mind is divided by fear, by comparing yourself to others, or by this hyperactive inner critic that's constantly asking, wait, how am I doing? And the Zeigarnik Effect perfectly explains what fuels all this entropy. This psychological principle shows that our minds actively fixate on incomplete tasks. That unanswered email, the weird text message, the bill you still need to pay, they don't just sit politely in the background. They are actively tugging at your working memory. They create this relentless field of inner noise that just exhausts you because you're constantly negotiating with yourself just to stay on task.
Just think about this number for a second, 23. According to researcher Gloria Mark, when you give in to that inner noise and take just a quick glance at a notification, it takes an average of 23 minutes to fully return your deep attention to the original task. 23 minutes! Distraction isn't just a tiny momentary lapse. It completely fractures the continuity your brain desperately needs to do any sort of meaningful work. Let's pivot to the solution in Section 3. What is quantum flow? The state beneath the struggle. So what do we actually mean by quantum flow? And let's be super clear up front. This is absolutely not some corporate productivity hack meant to turn you into a robot. Flow is a state of deep inner coherence.
It's the state beneath all that struggle, where your action and your awareness just seamlessly merge together. Csikszentmihalyi identified 6 core features of this state. Ready? First, complete concentration on the task. Second, a merging of action and awareness. You basically stop overthinking and just start doing. Third, your inner critic, that exhausting self-consciousness, finally diminishes. Fourth, time completely alters. Hours can literally feel like minutes. Fifth, you feel a profound sense of control. And finally, the experience is autotelic, which is just a fancy way of saying the act of doing the work is deeply rewarding in and of itself, totally regardless of the outcome. All right, moving to section 4, the biology of flow, grounding the mystical in the physical.
The crucial thing to understand here is that while flow can feel almost magical or even mystical, it is 100% grounded in physical reality. It is heavily supported by your nervous system, your neurochemistry, and your actual brain function. Your body is the instrument making this happen. Take transient hypofrontality, for example. This is Arne Dietrich's hypothesis that during flow, parts of your prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for all that heady analytical self-monitoring, actually downshift. So when people say you need to get out of your own way, it is a literal biological shift. That constant narrator in your head quiets down, which allows your practiced embodied intelligence to smoothly take the wheel without any interference. But to get there, your nervous system has to be in exactly the right state. Elizabeth Stanley's window of tolerance shows us that if your arousal is too low, you're foggy, you're completely disengaged. But if it's too high, you're in a total panic and your brain flips into survival mode. Flow lives exclusively in that middle ground, this beautiful state of alert calm. This is where a challenge mobilizes your focus, but you still feel safe enough to actually engage, without your nervous system completely hijacking the process. I absolutely love this quote from the pioneering psychologist William James. The great thing, then, in all education is to make our nervous system our ally instead of our enemy. Just take a breath and let that sink in for a second. We really have to stop treating our tired, overwhelmed bodies as obstacles that we just need to forcefully push through. Flow is about partnering with your biology, not fighting it. So how do we do that? Section 5, reclaiming your attention, establishing the sacred boundary. How do we practically make our nervous system our ally and invite this flow state in? Well, it starts with a simple rule popularized by author Steven Kotler: flow follows focus. Flow doesn't just magically arrive because we wish for it, right? It only arises when our attention is deliberately gathered and fiercely protected. To do this, you have to establish what's called a sacred boundary of uninterrupted time. Here's how you do it. First, dump the psychic entropy. Literally name and write down all those open loops so your brain knows they're safely stored somewhere else. Second, aggressively silence all external signals. Turn the phone off, close all those tabs. Third, protect a solid 90-minute block for one specific task. This honors your body's natural ultradian rhythms, which are biologically designed for 90 to 120 minutes of intense focus, followed by actual, real recovery. You aren't meant to grind endlessly. And finally, Section 6, entering the deep now, when time changes shape. Let's look at how this practice builds toward its ultimate reward. When you fiercely protect that boundary, time itself actually begins to change shape. You enter what is called the deep now. Normally, we live in self-time. We're either trapped backwards in past regrets or stretched way forwards into future anxieties, constantly evaluating ourselves. And honestly, it is exhausting. But flow plunges you into the deep now. In this elongated present, the heavy narrative of who you are and what you must achieve completely quiets down. The present stops being a stage where your ego has to perform, and it becomes a sanctuary that you can actually inhabit and act from. And that brings us to this incredibly beautiful realization. Attention is love in action. When you give something your absolute full attention, you are granting it the dignity of being fully received. Protecting your focus isn't some act of rigid corporate discipline or self-denial. It is an act of devotion. It's devotion to the work, to the craft, and to the life that is actively trying to move through you. Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative question to think about. What becomes possible when you stop fighting yourself long enough to actually enter what is here? You are not broken just because your mind wanders in a highly distracted world. But you do have the power to close the doors, gather your scattered attention, and step into the deep now. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Now go protect your attention and let's see what you can truly build.
Thank you for watching. If something in this resonated with you, then you're already closer than you think. If you're ready to go deeper, there's a link below to my book, Quantum Flow: How to Collapse Distraction, Enter the Deep Now, and Align with the life trying to move through you. This isn't theory, it's a framework you can actually use. Tap the link below and step into it.